In 1944, the Japanese Empire had a plan to win the war. It was simple, brutal, and based on centuries of samurai tradition. They would build invincible fortresses on the outer islands of the Pacific. They would fill them with thousands of troops, massive coastal guns, and bunkers of concrete and steel. They would lure the Americans into attacking these strongholds, bleeding them white in a series of gruesome frontal assaults. They believed the Americans were arrogant and predictable. They believed the U.S. Navy would have no choice but to smash itself against these walls. But Admiral Chester Nimitz, the American commander, looked at the map and asked a question the Japanese never expected. Why should we attack them at all? For more untold World War II stories like this, make sure to subscribe. This is the story of how the U.S. Navy defeated Japan's greatest fortresses, not by destroying them, but by ignoring them. It is the story of a 4-day battle that didn't just kill soldiers, it killed an entire philosophy of war. The Japanese strategy was called the Z Plan. It was a doctrine of the decisive battle. They wanted a repeat of the Battle of Tarawa, where 1,000 Marines died for a tiny strip of coral. They fortified islands like Jaluit and Mili in the Marshalls, turning them into meat grinders. Admiral Manzo Akiyama, the Japanese commander, was confident. The American mind is methodical, he told his staff. They lack imagination. They will strike where we are strongest. He was wrong. American intelligence had cracked the Japanese codes. They knew exactly where the Japanese were strong, and more importantly, they knew where they were weak. Nimitz gathered his admirals in Pearl Harbor. He pointed to the map. He didn't point to the fortresses. He pointed to the center of the cluster, Kwajalein Atoll. It was the administrative hub. It was the nerve center. And because it was behind the shield of the outer fortresses, it was shockingly undefended. Out of 5,000 personnel there, only 1,200 were actual combat troops. The rest were cooks, clerks, and construction workers. Nimitz's order was simple and terrifying. We are not going to Jaluit. We are not going to Mili. We are going straight to Kwajalein. The Americans launched a masterclass in deception. Carrier groups hammered the outer fortresses for weeks. They bombed the runways, shelled the beaches. To the Japanese, this looked like the softening up before an invasion. They congratulated themselves. The Americans were doing exactly what they predicted. But it was all smoke and mirrors. On January 30th, 1944, the Japanese commanders on Kwajalein woke up to a nightmare. The horizon wasn't empty. It was filled with the silhouette of the greatest armada ever assembled. 7 battleships, 11 carriers, hundreds of transports carrying 40,000 troops. And they weren't attacking the outer islands. They had sailed right past them. They were inside the lagoon. Admiral Akiyama watched from his bunker as 14-inch shells from the USS New Mexico and USS Mississippi began to turn his headquarters into dust. The guns he had placed to face the ocean were useless. The enemy was behind him. "Our doctrine has failed," he scribbled in his diary. "The enemy does not honor the rules. They fight a different war." The assault was overwhelming. The Americans didn't just land, they swarmed. On Kwajalein Island, the bombardment was so intense it erased the island's features. Trees were reduced to splinters. Bunkers were cracked open like eggs. When the infantry hit the beaches, resistance was desperate but futile. The Japanese defenders, cooks and clerks handed rifles, fought with suicidal bravery, but they were annihilated by tanks and flamethrowers. Within 4 days, it was over. The heart of the Japanese defense in the Marshalls had been ripped out. Nearly 8,500 Japanese defenders were killed. The American losses? Fewer than 400 dead. It wasn't a battle, it was a demolition. But the true brilliance of the strategy wasn't the battle itself. It was what happened to the islands the Americans didn't attack. On the fortress islands of Jaluit, Mili, and Wocha, thousands of elite Japanese troops waited for an attack that never came. They stood by their massive guns, scanning the horizon, ready to die for the emperor. But the ships never appeared. Instead, they saw American convoys sailing safely past them, just out of range. They realized with dawning horror that they hadn't been defeated. They had been bypassed. They were cut off. No food, no ammo, no orders. The Americans didn't need to kill them. they just let them rot. The invincible fortresses became open-air prisons. Thousands of men starved to death, guarding beaches no one wanted. This was the new American way of war. Island hopping. Don't attack strength, attack weakness. Turn the enemy's greatest assets into liabilities. For the Japanese high command, the shock was total. They had prepared for a boxing match. The Americans brought a gun. The psychological blow was devastating. How do you fight an enemy who refuses to play by your rules? How do you defend a fortress when the enemy just walks around it? Kwajalein wasn't just a victory, it was the end of an era. The age of the static fortress was dead. The age of maneuver warfare had begun. And 40,000 Japanese soldiers were left to wither on the vine, defeated by a general who was smart enough not to fight them.